Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Fitzpatrick. I'm the Director of GRC Security Access Pay, and I'm joined by our CEO, Anish Kapoor.
Hey, Mark. Great to be here. Feels like life has come full circle for me, because I started out life as an internal auditor, then I started life as an external auditor, became an internal auditor, then ran a finance team and a finance function. And so I think the topic today is kind of one that's dear to my heart. It's kind of how I started my career, really.
It's why we've always got so much to speak about and a great topic to go into today. So, just for the audience, we'll be going into our thoughts and opinions on the upcoming UK SOX legislation. So, as I stated, I work in the GRC space. However, I appreciate there'll be a variety of people on this call. Anish, as the CEO of the business, you're aware of many of the moving parts and the different business functions. It'd be great maybe if you just do an introduction on the UK SOX and how you think it's going to be implemented.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I guess if we maybe talk a little bit about why this is happening. There was a number of, or there have been a number of very significant kind of business failures. So if you think of Carillion, think of things like Patisserie Valerie, to name but a few. So these were very big. These were listed businesses, and one would expect a listed business would have significant controls in place and very robust procedures around their financial reporting and knowing exactly how much cash they've got and what position they're in, etc. And it was a bit of a shock to the system, really, when companies that big and who were supposed to be subject to quite a lot of regulatory oversight failed, right? And they failed because the financial statements they were putting out to the market were just factually wrong, right? And really that is what set off a whole train of reviews within the Treasury and the Department of Business, Energy, and whatever else is in there these days, to really look at that and say, look, how can this happen, right? How can we get to a point where organizations that are supposed to be have really strong controls and robust processes in place can actually misstate their financial statements so fundamentally. And the bigger issue is that if people don't have trust in those financial statements, then it kind of undermines the whole kind of ecosystem of finance and sort of funding, for the UK. So really, this thing that we call UK SOX actually has it started off as a review by the government with a very grand title of how can we restore faith and trust in the reporting regime of the UK, and what they have settled on after looking at a variety of ways of doing this is something that is a lot like Sarbanes-Oxley over in the US. Hence why we have this kind of nickname, which is UK SOX. And essentially, if you think about Sarbanes-Oxley, the heart of Sarbanes-Oxley is the directors of the company personally attesting to the fact that the financial statements are correct, and also attesting that they have reviewed the controls and the processes and everything that goes into creating those financial statements, so that they can make that attestation, if you like, with a level of certainty. And it's that same concept that's now being brought into the UK, and I mean this is a huge change, right? I mean, like I said, I started off life as an auditor. I mean, dare I say, 30 odd years ago, and this is the biggest change that I've seen in all my time being involved in kind of both internal and external audit. So it is a huge shift. It's a huge change because as the directors of the company, you are now personally attesting that these financial statements are correct. And actually, it's not just I'm signing a bit of paper. It is I have paid due care and attention to what systems and controls and processes we've got, and I've considered that in making this statement that these numbers are correct.
So I think it's quite interesting that we've, I guess, maybe not had the incidents or maybe corporate scandals that America has, and they went down the Sarbanes-Oxley route, and maybe now we are having some of those incidents to a lesser degree. We've kind of chosen the same path as them, and it mirrors. It's got so many similarities between the two.
I think that's exactly right. So a lot of I think everyone in the UK is looking at this and saying, actually, you know what, it's probably going to end up being implemented in the same way that Sarbanes-Oxley was, over in the US. So I mean, at the moment, it's that where we're up to in this whole process is that the government have concluded their review and have published a set of actions, and they did that in May of this year. A key part of that is the creation of this new corporate reporting regime, which I kind of touched on at a very high level, but I will go into more detail, I'm sure, later on in our conversation. A key part of that is the creation of a new regulator called the Audit, Reporting and Governance Authority, or ARGA for short. And ARGA will be given a whole set of enforcement powers to basically ensure that these changes are put into effect. And then on top of that, there will be these kind of extra requirements added. So actually, it's not just this sort of director's statement that reporting is correct. There's actually a couple of new reports. So we're probably all used to seeing in an annual report, you get a financial statement, you get a director's report, sometimes you get an ESG report and various other things. And being added to that will be a resilience statement, an audit and assurance policy, and actually a statement on your payment practices.
Indeed, yeah. And I think later on in the call, we're going to kind of break those down a little bit as well, and go into them in more detail, along with some of the regulators in the space as well. I think one of the things that I'd definitely be interested in your opinion on as well, as you say, kind of a veteran of the industry, is why you think it should be a top priority for the finance directors, the audit committees, and those involved in this area.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the really big one here is the fact that there is this enhanced liability for directors. So you've got to remember that the directors are now signing an attestation. It's them putting their name to something and saying, right, we are certifying that this is a true statement. With that comes this kind of a carrot and a stick, right? So the stick is, right, well, if you're going to say that, you'd better be sure that what you're saying is correct, because if it's not, you are there's a whole set of criminal and civil liabilities that accrue to the directors, and in particular, there is something called the malice and clawback provisions, which sounds it sounds very scary. I mean, actually, it's something that has been in place in the financial services industry for many years. So if you are a PRA regulated entity, you will be aware of malice and clawback provisions. Essentially, it's a set of provisions that say, if you as a director, have not acted in the way that you should have done, or you've made a misrepresentation, then the regulator can basically adjust your remuneration, for the next couple of years. So they might decide that actually you don't deserve what you're being paid, you need to be paid less. And they can also claw back any remuneration you've had for the last couple of years, right? So they might decide, you know what, you've behaved in a way which is so at odds with what we were trying to achieve, or the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, that you now need to forfeit. And by remuneration, they mean everything. So it's salary, it's bonus, it's dividends, it's whatever money you've taken out of the business. They could get you to pay that back into the business, right? So it is. So when I said this is the biggest change that I've seen in 30, this is why, right? Because this is a huge change in the way that the liability of directors is sort of thought about. And like I said, if you're a business that's been if you're a financial services business and you're regulated by the PRA, the directors and senior managers will have been subject to a malice and clawback regime anyway for the last few years. But this is the first time it's, if you're not in that industry, suddenly you're going to be seeing this provision. So that's why it's really important for directors. And then the government are also saying, hey, look, audit committees have a role to play here. And so what they're going to be saying is audit committees will be held to a higher degree of accountability by this new regulatory body, by ARGA. And they will have the power to actually apply some of the same sort of fines, if you like, or enforcement procedures to the audit committee, and force them to take more seriously their role as an audit committee in terms of scrutinising, well, what are the internal controls of the business? Are they robust? Are they reliable? Are they properly, kind of scrutinising what the directors are saying to them? So when you put those two things together, the two big shifts in I suppose the level of proactivity that the regulator is going to take in terms of really making sure that this is taken seriously. So that's why if you're a finance leader, if you're a director of one of these businesses, if you're an audit committee, you absolutely have to. This has to be top of your list of things that you're focused on.
Yeah. Well, one thing I found interesting reading through the reports is that the scope and the control requirements as well, it's been a bit left open-ended in that they may increase in the future as well. So I think that the more industry can almost get on the front foot, work the best practice in as soon as possible, the better it'll work for everyone involved. So I think there's that priority as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point, because I think I say legislation, it's actually the proposed legislation, and on the wording that they're proposing specifically calls out exactly that point, Mark. It says, on day one it's going to be this, but we believe that this is going to change over time. One example of that is who it applies to. On day one, there's one set of organisations, but it specifically says this is just a start, right? And we're going to roll it out to more and more organisations.
And I think that brings us on to a really good point for the next one. We're probably going to have a few people on the call who know that it's going to impact them. Others maybe who are a little unsure. So it'd be great to hear maybe your thoughts on what sort of businesses and organisations do you see falling into scope for UK SOX.
And again, there was a lot of debate on this as to who should fall in scope. And there is this really interesting term now called acronym called a PI, which is a public interest entity. which basically just means that, an organisation that the failure of that organisation would cause significant issues to the public at large. And the initial definition of that is 750 employees and 750 million pounds of turnover. Right. So if you tick those two boxes, you are a PIE, and on day one, you are absolutely subject to all of these kind of enhanced controls and reporting. But to your point, Mark, what the government have made very, very clear is they expect that to be gradually rolled out to more and more types of organisations. So quite how that happens and when it happens is still to be determined. But this new regulator is currently being set up. So ARGA is currently being set up. It will be up and running next year, and they will then be defining that kind of rollout program. But certainly what we know is that those 750 employees and turnover greater, so 750 and 750 as they call it. If you fall into that category, you should be planning to have this apply to you from 2025 onwards.
Yeah, indeed. And I think definitely with the organisations falling in and out of scope, even if there's a potential that you might be in scope, it's definitely worth keeping track of it. I know there's been talk around whether charities or universities would fall in scope, and they currently are. But again, it's could go wider than that in the future as well.
Yeah. Because again, if we sort of think about where this is going, it's really about, in some sense, this is best practice, right? This isn't this isn't the government trying to enforce a set of controls that shouldn't be there. What they're saying is, no, these controls should be there, and really, we just want to make sure that you as directors know that and are actually putting those things in place. So it is entirely reasonable and sensible that they look to roll that out to a wider set of organisations.
Definitely, and I think for a lot of the people listening as well, that the next question on a lot of people's minds would be what we need to do. How do we become compliant? I know we briefly touched on it earlier on, but it'd be great to dive more into some of the requirements on directors and some of the obligations on the companies. Yeah.
So a lot of this stems from. So we sort of think about it. There's a couple of things that the directors now need to sign up to. So number one is this attestation around the reporting being correct and internal controls being in place. There's the resilience statement, there's the audit and assurance policy, and then there's this reporting on payment practices. So you've kind of got these four these four reports, if you like, four extra things that you need to be certifying. But really, all of them come down to looking at the control, looking at your processes, your end-to-end processes for, okay, how do we create our financial statements and reporting? How do we, and you kind of look at it completely end-to-end. So if you think about, as a finance function, you would look at things like, procure to pay, order to cash, record to report. So you look at your sort of end-to-end processes. For treasury, same thing. What are your end-to-end processes? And then you sort of have to look at, well, what are the controls? What are the controls that are in place? What are the risks? And what are the controls to mitigate those risks?
Indeed, I think it's when you kind of dig down into what's required to build those documents. There may only be a couple of high-level policy documents, but the items below it, whether that be analysing your supply chain, making sure you're safe for cybersecurity incidents, the ESG work required, it really does end up touching every part of your business.
Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting. So if you look at, so for example, there's this document called a resilience statement. And what that is saying is that you need to have thought about, well, how do we operate our business in a kind of business continuity scenario? What does the disaster recovery look like? Have we actually stress tested that? Have we actually run that scenario? How would we be able to operate as a business? And have we got the systems and processes and procedures in place to enable us to do that? So it's kind of really forcing you to look at the way you do things and think about, well, actually, you might be doing things that kind of work today, in a business as usual way, if you see what I mean. But actually, if you were to say, well, how would that work in a business continuity context? It may just not work, right? I mean, I think we saw this, with COVID when, one example is just making payments, paying suppliers, paying staff, and then there was a realization that there's only one computer in the office that has the smart card software installed, and no one could make any payments, right? So it's things like that you need to be looking for when you look at your end-to-end processes. You need to be sort of thinking, okay, well, what could go wrong here? The other big thing, though, is in the audit and assurance policy, what's required. I mean, really, what's required there is the directors need to set out the basis on which they believe their controls are sufficient. So, in other words, you have to have done this review. You have to do that. You have to understand your end-to-end processes. You have to understand what the risks are. You have to you have to know why the controls are there.
Indeed, I think it's worth pointing out as well. It's the auditors are going to come in as well, and looking at the statements, they're going to be looking at the controls and the effectiveness of the controls themselves. So, as you say, they really do have to be understood at all levels of the organisation.
Absolutely, and in particular, this audit and assurance policy calls out a specific statement around controls to prevent material fraud, right? And that goes back to what I said right at the very beginning. Why has all this happened? Well, because we've had a number of material frauds, right? Where, I mean, if you think about Patisserie Valerie, I mean, crikey, this was a listed business whose balance sheet cash number was just fictitious. So, and we're talking sort of, I don't know, 50, 60, 100 million pounds worth of cash, right? So it's that's really what when you sort of, I suppose, as directors, stroke audit committees, stroke financial leaders, you've got to be looking at your end-to-end processes and thinking, okay, how could someone try and commit fraud here, and what controls have we got around that to prevent that? What things have we got in place? Use Patisserie Valerie as an example, because I think it was the FTU or the financial controller actually just creating kind of fake bank statements. So something as basic as, well, how do we actually know that that statement has come from our bank, right? So there's a specific provision for the directors and the audit committee and the auditors to be looking at these things. And so, looking at end-to-end processes, looking at it with a view of what are the risks, what are the controls, and then to your point, Mark, they have to be audited, and they have to be audited both by internal audit and external audit. And there's currently a debate going on as to, so under US Sarbanes-Oxley, you have to have an external auditor validate that these controls are in place. Now, currently, the UK version is not mandating that. But what it's saying to the audit committees is, you need to tell us how you're coming to the conclusion that these controls are A, in place, and B, being enforced, right? And if you're not going to use external validation, you need to tell us why, right?
Definitely. I think one point to note on that would be, a lot of regulators, a lot of industry partners as well, they're going down the same route with a lot of these controls as well. So it's more than likely that people on this call, others in different areas of the kind of financial sector, they'll be looking at these controls anyway, that they're going to come in force in the next couple of years, whether that be through open banking, BACS, SWIFT, the FCA. Everyone's kind of moving down this route now. So it'll come up regardless in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and actually, there is this framework over in the US. There's a framework for control called COSO. And it's interesting if we kind of look at what's happening in the US. I mean, COSO has been around for about 15, 20 years now. So, and interesting, what we're seeing there is this move from manual controls to automated controls. So, in other words, generally speaking, the internal auditors, external auditors are sort of saying, okay, look, maybe 20 years ago it was okay to have manual controls, but really, today with all the technology we've got, with automation, really controls should be systematic. They should be automated, and it shouldn't. And so we're sort of seeing that in the US, and I do think we will see that thought process applied in the UK, because there's no reason why we shouldn't just jump straight to that automated view of controls as opposed to manual controls.
Definitely. I think with I guess some people might now be thinking in regards to the timescales involved, how do we implement these automated controls? Have we got an idea when, in your opinion, kind of UK SOX will come into force, when people should start looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of timings, the new regulators being set up as we speak. So ARGA will be up and running next year, and essentially they have the power. They have the powers to make all this happen. So there doesn't have to be a lot of laws passed or anything like that. This is it's kind of a code-based implementation. So once this regulator is set up, really everything starts moving. So everyone generally is saying, okay, look, by 2025, we really need to be ready. We need to be assuming that we're going to have to be making some statements about our controls and all these other attestations that we need to make.
I'd say it's definitely one for the compliance roadmap for 2024, and one that people should be looking at now, is my opinion on it as well. Yeah,
well, I mean, if you just look at a US SOX project, I mean, everyone would say, look, it takes about 2 years, right? So well, you got to start now, because it's I think it's definitely one that people should be thinking about right now and starting to kind of get moving on right now.
Definitely, yeah. And I think, it's been great talking about it today as well. And hopefully we've let people know. I appreciate we're probably running up to the end of our time now. So hopefully we've conveyed a lot of the items that were relevant. I don't know, Anish, whether you had any kind of highlighted points that you wanted to end with at all.
No, I think we've covered everything. I think for me, the key point is the point you raised at the end, which is, look, it just takes time to do this. So you do need to get started. And 2 years will come on us very quickly, right? So the sooner you start, the better. But no, it's been great talking about. I could talk about internal controls for hours and hours and hours. But yeah, been a pleasure.
No, great. Thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thanks, Anish, for your time today. Thank you.